I'm in the mood. Well, I don't know what mood exactly I'm in, but whatever mood I'm in, I think is perfectly represented by this Punisher sweater. I feel like I'm ready to take on this live show. This is probably the live show that I've been the most excited for ever since making my return, which is surprising because, I don't know, we just had our best show on Sunday, in my opinion. I thought it was our highest quality show yet. So I think we're moving up from here. But today we're talking about Nebraska and Iowa and the rivalry, the beautiful rivalry that is the Heroes Trophy. Speaking of which, thank you, Michael Valadez, for being a moderator here on our YouTube channel. Go Big Red to you, just popped right in the chat. We're also going to be talking about Michigan, not just whether or not they will be a better team or have a better bounce back year than USC. So we'll also be talking about USC for any of you Trojan fans. We'll also be mentioning whether or not he'll survive the season for a variety of reasons. And I'm also going to discuss Ohio State and Larry Johnson. We're going to talk about Illinois and whether they can make the college football playoff or not. There's a lot to get to today. And also Penn State. The beauty of all these things is that all of these questions were actually submitted by you. Yes, you. All of these questions were submitted by you. So thank you for giving me content to talk about, for engaging with me. I appreciate all of these things, obviously. And before we begin, I just want to give you a suggestion to click the link in the pinned comment in the live chat. Talk about the, not talk about, man, I'm all over the place, but that's because I'm excited. Open up for you for free. No charge to you. Open up the Discord server link, join it, and then migrate to the hashtag YouTube mailbox channel and type any question that you have, any college football related question, and I'm going to add it to my document, my sheet that I use, where I log all the questions you guys ask in the Discord server, and it will be made into a video eventually. Remember, it's not even June yet, so I have plenty of weeks to go through these questions and really just dig into which ones I'm most interested in on a week-to-week basis and answer them and make a video out of each one. So since we're this early, and since I average answering, 6 to 7 questions per show, we have several more shows left, your question, if you ask it right now, I can almost guarantee you will be answered before kickoff. And all these questions will be relevant before kickoff. Some of them will be relevant during September, October, November. And I'm going to start talking about September, October, and November in the form of maybe some early matchup previews, in the form of questions you've asked and just matchups I want to talk about here in a few weeks. But let's get to the show. Please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below. Remember, this is all free. Subscribing doesn't sign you up for anything. It just means that you follow the channel. Hitting the notification bell, all that does is, if you have notifications enabled, which I highly advise that you do, you will get notified when I upload a new video or go live, which is particularly useful. And also, I'll be doing about a 10 to 20 minute Q&A session at the end of this video for any questions that you guys have that you want me to answer right now. Super chats for those are encouraged, as that way I'll get to your question first. But if none of you super chat, then I will go through and, parcel through and answer your questions. But super chatting makes it very easy, especially if you have a question that you really want me to answer in depth. Then send in a super chat and we'll do that for the final 10, 20 minutes of the show. Okie dokie. Let's kick this off. And first and foremost, I want to talk about Nebraska and Iowa, the Heroes Trophy. How many of you, comment down below, how many of you knew that this rivalry had a name? The Heroes game, where each team, or the team who wins, gets awarded the Heroes Trophy. To me, it's been common knowledge for a while, but I don't know if too many people know of the rivalry by this name. Maybe I'm making a poor assumption of college football fans, but it doesn't have a super fancy trophy, and neither Nebraska or Iowa have been a consistently, top 25 team over the past decade, say. Like, this isn't a rivalry that has defined much of sports, sadly, because they have, in my mind, two very passionate and involved fan bases. I think there's a lot of potential, not just in Nebraska, who's a blue blood university, but I also think Iowa has some potential, some pipelines, recruiting grounds, and a history behind them. And they've played every year since 2011, when both teams were first members of the Big Ten at the exact same time. So tell me what you knew about this game, and hopefully we get some Iowa and Nebraska fans in this live show. Okay. So the past 2 years of the Matt Rule era, so that's as long as Matt Rule's been here, since 2023, have involved some particularly painful losses on the part of Nebraska to Iowa. Since 2011, when both teams were members of the Big Ten at the same time for the first time, since 2011, Iowa has held a 10-4 advantage over Nebraska. Nebraska has not even won in their own stadium. They have not beaten Iowa in their own stadium since over a decade ago. I believe the last time they did this was 2013, was the last time. So correct me if I'm wrong on that. But Nebraska has had a lot of troubles with Iowa recently. The Nebraska Cornhuskers have been trending up under Matt Rule, but at the end of the year, in the final game of November, that Black Friday night, or in 2023 under Matt Rule, or before that, that Black Friday afternoon, Iowa typically steals away a victory. And until last year, where Nebraska finally went to a bowl game and they won the bowl game, so they ended the year off on a positive note, typically what Iowa did was end Nebraska's entire season in a very sour way. Iowa has had a 10-4 record while both teams have been in the Big Ten, and most recently, Iowa won 13-10. Yeah, sorry about that. I'll wait until that's done. Yeah, I don't like living at home with a dog. Okay. I think that's done. I hope that's done. Can Nebraska finally beat Iowa? Is the question here. And this question is submitted by Husker History K. Nebraska fan, I presume. He asks, will Nebraska break the Iowa curse? That was his verbatim question. And it's a big question because up until recently, when last season Iowa, well, they beat Nebraska, but Nebraska still went to a bowl game and then won the bowl game against Boston College. So they ended the year off on a positive note. Typically, Nebraska would end the year off on a negative note, a very negative note, and it would come at the hands of rival Iowa, Nebraska's biggest rival. And also, I would say, quite honestly, Iowa's biggest rival too, as it's in conference at the end of the year. And I think some of the antics that both of these teams have showcased in the Heroes game shows that they care about each other more than any other team. So, all that being said, it's important for Nebraska to get over that Iowa hump. And it's important because Iowa is a good team. They're a good program. They have a lot of staff continuity. They have one of the best defensive coordinators in college football, potentially in the history of college football, and Phil Parker. What he does on the defensive side of the ball with the talent he has access to is impressive. LeVar Woods is one of the best, probably in my mind the best, definitely the best special teams coordinator in college football. And what he does with that talent is impressive. And now Tim Lester's their offensive coordinator, and they have done impressive things on the offensive side of the ball. The point being, it's impressive what Iowa's done. The fact that they, win close games, the fact that they stay consistent in their identity and yet consistently win is good. It's actually something that Nebraska could look up to, learn a thing or two from. But ultimately, Iowa has a very limited ceiling. Iowa is not a top 10 program. They're not a blue blood like Nebraska. In fact, program-wise, they are nothing close to Nebraska historically. Nebraska has more resources. Nebraska's recruiting is better. Even when Iowa was winning 10 games consistently, or 8 or 9 games, and Nebraska was lucky enough to reach 5, Nebraska would out-recruit Iowa. Nebraska's problem has never been resources. It's never been recruiting. I mean, to a certain degree, maybe so, with leaving the Big 12 for the Big 10, although I think with the Big 10 extending their reach to the Pacific, that obviously helps Nebraska's potential recruiting pipelines. Nonetheless, even though Nebraska is not a very talent-rich state in football, their national brand and their history gives them a leg up in recruiting and resources compared to Iowa. And Iowa, as long as Ferentz is there, is going to have a ceiling. Their goal isn't to win national championships, or in my mind, even Big Ten championships. It's to win 8, 9, or 10 games and probably finish ranked in the top 25. I know for a fact Matt Rule and Nebraska certainly want to go higher than that, and in order to do so, they will have to eventually beat Iowa. More likely than not. I mean, maybe they can beat everyone else and lose to Iowa every year, but with the caliber of program and team that Iowa is, and how Iowa typically has to have a lot of returning production, and they operate in cycles. Iowa operates in cycles. Nebraska wants to go beyond that and operate on a year-to-year basis of competing for the college football playoff. And to do that, you typically have to beat the teams who rely on cycles to have up years, and then they have down years once that top cycle is over and they lose a lot of production, that being Iowa. So Husker History K asks that, and in his mind it's a curse, and I understand why that is, because this game has been so competitive. It's always been competitive. Iowa has rarely blown out Nebraska. In fact, they have not blown out Nebraska ever since Scott Frost took over as the Nebraska head coach, and he's been gone now for 3 years. Under Frost and Rule, Iowa's never blown out Nebraska. And yet, Nebraska's only defeated Iowa once in that time, since 2018 to the present day. So let's look over the last 2 Nebraska-Iowa games under Matt Rule. I was actually watching both of them today, and I guess in the back of my mind I knew I was going to be talking about this because I planned out the show well in advance, planned out the topics at least, made some of the graphics. And I decided, you know what? I think that talking about Nebraska is going to be good in some way or shape. And then this question pops up today, actually. Husker History K asked this question today. And I'm like, yeah, why not? I love talking about Nebraska football. They're a fan base that engages with me a lot, and they're a blue blood. And those are things that are 2 big boxes to be checked on my show. In 2023 and in 2024, Iowa won 13-10, where they had a special teams advantage. Their punter averaged 1, 2, 3, up to 4, depending on which game you're looking at, more yards per punt, which might not seem big, but football's won in a game of inches, especially when it's a 13-10 type game and a rivalry in the cold, which incentivizes slower play. In both games, Nebraska outgained Iowa overall. Iowa won the turnover battle by +2 in each game, regardless of whether Nebraska was hosting or Iowa was hosting. Iowa won the turnover battle. Iowa wasn't necessarily in control in both games. The first game, they established control at points, but Nebraska was able to keep up with the Hawkeyes and tie it up. And in 2024, I mean, Nebraska 9 out of 10 times wins that game given the circumstances. I mean, Nebraska outgained Iowa by 170 yards, 95 on the ground, 75 through the air. Iowa averaged 2.5 more yards per pass attempt, but that was because Caleb Johnson had a 75-yard touchdown reception where he broke like 5 or 6 tackles, just being the insane alien he was at running back. This has been a close game. It's been a competitive game, and that is ultimately not Nebraska's problem is trying to just compete with Iowa. It's trying to get over the hump. And I think there's something mental to it as well, with the mistakes that Nebraska consistently makes in these games, especially the last two games where Matt Rule's been the head coach, where it's been his program. And Iowa clearly is more talent limited. That's why in the 2023 game, Nebraska was able to get a deep downfield pass from a quarterback to their wide receiver, where most of it was air yards, and Iowa's longest pass of the day was mostly from yards after catch in that 2023 matchup. They always have had the better quarterback in these last two games. They've had the better receivers. Last year, in the matchup in 2024, Nebraska was basically better at everything except for running back and special teams. And I would also say probably if you look at it more closely, I think that Iowa did a better job protecting their quarterback, and I think that their defensive front in different ways played better. Although Iowa's offensive line and rushing attack was also entirely shut down by Nash Hutmacher, Ty Robinson. Both defenses played exceptionally well. The offense's different story. And it was similar in 2023, although in 2023 both teams were worse than they were in 2024. So one could argue that was just a case of two teams being pretty mediocre. In 2024, both teams were above average at the worst, good at the best. And yet, Nebraska dominated in 2024 statistically. They were even with Iowa statistically in 2023 and had home field advantage. They should be 2-0 under Matt Rule, and yet they're 0-2. So how can they beat Iowa? How can they get over that hump, especially since in 2025 they host Iowa? And they host Iowa after a road trip to Penn State, and then before that they have a bye. Iowa will not have the same amount of rest built up and within them, same amount of charge probably entering the game that Nebraska will. So Nebraska's a lot of advantages, but they've had a lot of advantages in the past. So what can they do? What can they change to win this game? Now, I'm not Matt Rule. I'm not Kirk Ferentz. I'm not a coach. I'm not a expert on the game like they are. I'm an analyst. I think I know some things. I enjoy talking about the sport. I still have a lot to learn, but even if I spend every waking moment trying to learn about this, I probably won't come to the level of knowledge that these coaches have. Not just head coaches, but the assistant coaches, the analysts. They live and breathe this stuff, played the game for the most part, or if they haven't, again, they live and breathe it, make a lot more money than I do, manage a lot more than I do. So, I'm not saying that my reasons are going to lead Nebraska to do anything differently, if hypothetically they were to listen to me. But I think, it's just a thought here, I think that getting special teams to be competent, to make your extra points, to make your field goals, to have competent punting, to protect your punter, to make sure that you are able to execute properly a fair catch, and to be disciplined and do the little things well, I think those things will lead Nebraska to a victory over Iowa, because we've already established that Nebraska is a top 25 roster in terms of a team talent composite, from example from 24/7 Sports. Iowa does not. Nebraska has superior wide receivers. They have a 5-star quarterback. They have a blue blood history. They have a great NIL program. Iowa does not have these things in the same capacity. They don't. But what Iowa does have in its advantage, in its DNA, that gives them an advantage over Nebraska, is they are good at the fundamentals, and they execute to the best of their ability. Meanwhile, I think this is a better analogy. Nebraska is like a wave, a radio wave or maybe a wave on a lake, up and down and up and down, especially against Iowa. In watching these two games, the 2023 and 2024 Heroes game, Nebraska was all over the place. Iowa was much more consistent. They were more like a linear line, just shooting straight. You know what Iowa is. You know what they're bringing to you. I even watched Corn Crazed's live reaction to last year's Iowa game. I love watching his live reactions. I typically do every Saturday after a Nebraska game. He's one of my favorite content creators overall. And he said it perfectly. You know, and this is not verbatim, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you know what's coming. He used the analogy that someone calls you. It's like it's the scene from Breaking Bad where someone calls Hank Schrader, and it's just like in this very, groggy, voice. Two men are coming to kill you. You have 1 minute, like 1 minute to get out. You know what's coming, and the question is whether or not you choose to prepare. What Nebraska needs to do is they need better preparation, and better execution will come out of that. And then, if they can match Iowa's execution in special teams, in tackling, in blocking, in even just mentality. I think Iowa has a really good mentality about them that Nebraska's just lacked in recent memory, although I do think Rule is a good culture, and I think they're heading in the right direction there. You match Iowa in those areas, well then you can now exploit your talent advantage if you're Nebraska, and then win. So that's just my thoughts on the Iowa-Nebraska rivalry. It's really the difference between a talented team with it's the difference between potential and consistency. And consistency will beat potential every single time. Every single time. So the team with potential in Nebraska, they need to work on their consistency. That's why they brought in Mike Eckler. That's why they, demoted Marcus Satterfield midseason and brought on Dana Holgorsen. I think Matt Rule is doing these things, and I honestly like Nebraska's odds to overcome Iowa this season. But also, Iowa, they have Tim Lester in year 2. Their offensive line and defensive line looks really good. I think both of those units will be about the same. And on the defensive side, I think the trenches will be even better than they were last season, despite all they lost on the defensive line. This should once again be a great game, a close game, a competitive game. I think it will be that way for the foreseeable future. If you're in Nebraska, you don't want that to be the case, but it shouldn't be expected of Nebraska to destroy Iowa when they have not beaten them on their own home field in over a decade. Just a win, even if it's by a point or if it's off a controversial call, or I don't care. A win is a win in this game. And that would be a huge hump for Nebraska to overcome. So to answer your question, Husker History K, Nebraska can break the Iowa curse. And I think at some point under Matt Rule, they will, just looking at the trajectory Nebraska is on. But it will take time, it will take effort, and I'm not going to promise you that it will happen immediately or even this year. There's still a lot of advantages that Iowa has in this matchup, still, that have not been eliminated yet. And as for Nebraska, they still have some things to work on. But I think they're moving in the right direction in the sense of being a consistent college football playoff contender. They want that, and you can see it in their actions. And they also say that's what they want. As for Iowa, they're not shooting as high. And consequentially, I think you're not going to see the same growth from Iowa in comparison to Nebraska over the next half decade. So Nebraska can overcome Iowa. I think at one point they will, but I'm also not going to sit here and tell you that it's definitely going to happen here and now, and that Iowa doesn't have advantages that they can use to stay competitive in this rivalry. Right now they own this rivalry, and it's up to Nebraska to change that. Alrighty, up next, talking about Larry Johnson. Am I out on him? And if so, who should replace him? This has been something that has been quite interesting in Ohio State, I would say, Twitter dialogue, talking about Larry Johnson and his recruiting struggles. And so this is fascinating. This is very fascinating. On Twitter, not almost everyone, but a lot of people will defend Justin Fry and talk about him as some type of great coach. Meanwhile, for Larry Johnson, who's recruited better, even recently, and who put more of his guys into the NFL, didn't have the same bust rate that Fry did, which part of that's just the different positions of the D-line and O-line, but also for, I think, other obvious reasons that people shouldn't deny. The conversation is totally different, and it's interesting. Like, I have never seen outside of after the Nebraska game and after the Michigan game, I have never seen Fry get the amount of flack that even Larry Johnson's getting in the 2025 preseason after his unit destroyed. I mean, people are talking about Ohio State and how their O-line was destroying people in the playoffs, which is a false narrative. Watch the games. There were several Big Ten teams with half the supporting casts of Ohio State that got more consistent push against better talent than Ohio State's O-line did. The D-line actually killed people. No one was moving that defensive line. It's part of the reason why I think Steve Sarkisian called that toss play, because Texas had a very tough time running against Ohio State. They'd occasionally hit a run or two here, and it consistently, I thought they got at least a yard or two push on the Ohio State D-line, but that's not much. That's not enough to run for 4 times in a row and pick up a first down. If you run, up the middle, and you only get 2 yards per carry, you'll eventually turn it over on 4th. I mean, that defensive line destroyed people in the playoffs. It killed almost everyone after the Oregon game. And yet we're sitting here talking about Larry Johnson and whether or not we're out on him. At least that's what this person's asking me. So I find that very interesting, but I think my answer will be even more interesting. So Gyro, Ohio State fan, one of my favorite people to talk to on my Discord server. By the way, I know it's a quick and shameless plug, but please, in the pinned comment, in the live chat while we're live, and also in the video live show description, click the Discord server link, join it, and ask a question in the hashtag YouTube mailbox channel. Any question you have, and I'll make a video out of it. Gyro, passionate Ohio State fan, asks, are you out on Larry Johnson? Who could replace him? If I am out on Larry Johnson. So let's start with the first point. I'm going to reference an Ohio State page that I follow as frequently as possible. Don't have a lot of time, but when I do have time, I enjoy watching Juck on Bucks. It's one of my favorite Ohio State shows, college football shows overall. I think, at least from my perspective, that he is the corn-crazed of Ohio State football, and corn-crazed is the Juck on Bucks to Nebraska football. High-quality channels. Recommend you check them out. The channel names are spelled exactly as it sounds in the first things that pop up when you search them up. So search up those channel names and give them a like, give them a subscription, hit the notification bell, and if you have the resources, even join their membership clubs, which are, pretty insightful, pretty cool. Anyway, he and I, we talk, we exchange information at times, and I imagine he's already shared this by now. But he shared with me some graphics that involved the current top 5 recruiting classes for 2025, which those players have mostly enrolled, if not they're going to enroll by the time the season kicks off, and also the 2024 recruiting classes. Larry Johnson's unit, the defensive ends and defensive tackles, in 2024, he recruited the 7th, 24th, and 90th best defensive line players, or defensive end and defensive tackles. I forget exactly how that's formatted, but no top 5 player in either the D end or D tackle room, and a player who was even the 90th best, which I'm presuming is a 3-star. In 2025, 9th best, 18th, 27th, 36th, 61st. So a little bit better, but at the same time entering 2025, you'd expect to get more bodies in the room because you have 4 seniors leaving. The entire starting D-line for Ohio State last year, all of whom were drafted, all of whom were near elite grade at the worst, and then absolute aliens at the end of the year at best, all of them gone. And then Hero Kanu transfers out, Mitchell Melton transfers out, they go to Texas and Virginia respectively, where I think, especially Mitchell Melton at Virginia, I think will succeed, have playing time, be in a good situation, will eat. So it's also expected that because these recruits can see that there is going to be playing time opening up and that there's going to be more roster spots available, they're going to be more open to joining that room because it won't be as loaded, because every room has its own cycle. It's X amount of seniors, juniors, sophomores, freshmen, etc. You get the point, graduates. Ohio State has taken a, I would say almost to be frank, nosedive on defensive line recruiting. Last season, and this is in regards to blue chip ratio, which blue chip ratio can be gamed. You can game the blue chip ratio system. It can, for example, make you look better, or it can make you look worse than you actually are at recruiting. Just on a basic blue chip level, Ohio State's 2025 defensive line class, 50% of the players were blue chippers, and only one of them was top 10 at his position. Only 2 were top 20. It's not good. It's not good enough by Ohio State standards. When Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, when those schools are out recruiting you on the defensive line, and there are probably others, but I'm just talking about those, and that's been the case for multiple years now. And then you look at Penn State, and you look at Michigan, who they've lost more on the defensive line over the past 2-3 years than Ohio State has, and yet they've put more first rounders and high caliber players in the NFL. They've had defensive lines that have carried a higher upside to them in recent memory than Ohio State has. And at Ohio State, there's a reason why the secondary, for example, has the phrase best in America. Doesn't mean they are the best in America every year, but that's their standard. That's their goal. It's the same in every single position because it's Ohio State. They're the second best program since 2000. They're the second best of the 21st century, and there's an argument for them to be the best. And they're the most consistent program since World War II. So in terms of living up to the standard, Larry Johnson is not doing that. But does that mean I'm personally out on him? From an objective point of view, I can't say personally that he should have been axed after the season that he had in 2024. Does that mean that you can't apply any pressure to him at all and that he's untouchable? Well, of course not. Of course not. I mean, I thought that last season in 2024, the safety unit and the linebacker units were the ones that were overall the most impressive. Doesn't mean they were better than D-line, although I thought safety was. But in terms of improvement, in terms of consistency, in terms of getting better as the year went on, a linebacker, it was amazing seeing the growth of Cody Simon, for example. Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese looked good. The safeties were insane all season long. A credit to Caleb Downs and Ohio State for getting him in the portal, but Ransom was developed well. Hancock made the nice transition from corner to nickel. Corner was inconsistent, but good at a national level at the year's end. The D-line started off inconsistent, looked pretty mediocre in the Oregon game, but then they came through and really improved as the year went on. This is a big year for Larry Johnson because the recruiting has not been where it needs to be for several cycles now. And really the only thing that can redeem that is after you lose 4 starters, the unit reloads, does well, is top 10, top 15 nationally. And I give a little bit of grace there because of how many players are leaving. But at the same time, the current predicament of the D-tackle room, and I would even say the D-end room outside of the starters are good, but depth is concerning. That is the fault of the position coach. So I'm pretty close to being out on Larry Johnson. I'm not going to say yet that I quite am, because we'll find out during the season if the improvements on defense, especially a unit like the defensive line, I think, which made a night and day change from 2023 to 2024. We'll find out whether that was more because of Jim Knowles, who made, I would say, several schematic adjustments in the 2023 and 2024 seasons collectively. Like in that time frame, I think he made different adjustments, especially after the Oregon game in 2024. We'll find out whether the D-line improving was more so because of him or Larry Johnson pretty quickly, looking at that week 1 game against Texas, which should be a night game, just to quickly touch on that, but it is what it is. Texas has no incentive to move that game up to a Sunday at night. No incentive, so I don't blame them for saying no on that. And neither should you, in my mind. If you're Ohio State and you're at home, you should expect to beat Texas, regardless of the kickoff time. I know noon games are a pain, but that's a topic for another day. Larry Johnson's been at Ohio State since 2014. He's the ultimate Urban Meyer holder in the sense that he, along with Mickey Marotti and I believe Mark Pettoni, have been there since really Urban Meyer got there, although Johnson was hired 2 years after the fact. But he's been at Ohio State for over a decade. He's older, he's a legend, and at some point legends age, and they're no longer the same coaches or even players that they were. You know, Randy Moss was awesome in the NFL, but he's no longer playing in the NFL. Why? Because you get old, you break down, others pass you. It's the sad cycle of life, but it's the reality. So I think in the near future, Larry Johnson will retire. Whether he will voluntarily or be forced to retire, he will. But that will be the title of the end of his tenure at Ohio State. He won't be fired. He'll just be forced into retirement because he is a legend and he deserves that level of respect. I'm mostly out on him, though, to answer the first part of the question. The second part of the question is who should replace him. This is going to be very brief because I don't know. The standard at Ohio State is so high that even names that I think are good might not fit what Day and Patricia, assuming that Patricia will be here beyond a season, which I don't know if that's the case because I think he is more of an NFL guy. He loves recruiting. He loves it at Ohio State. I can tell those things for sure. But I think ultimately it's going to be more similar to the Chip Kelly move rather than, let's say, the Jim Knowles move, where if he has a really successful year this season, or even if it's just modestly successful, I think he'll be looking at NFL options, or at least the NFL will be looking at options that include hiring him to be one of their team's next defensive coordinator, if that makes sense. I think that Alan Clark at Texas, who was Larry Johnson's assistant and protege for 2 seasons as an assistant D-line coach, I think hiring him would be fantastic. It'd be big because you'd be stealing away a highly prized assistant from not a rival in the traditional sense, but a rival in terms of competition, a rival of excellence. I think Pat Kuntz or Buda Williams at Indiana, the D tackle and DN coach for the Hoosiers respectively, either of them would be a fantastic hire. I think that Cignetti has one of the best staffs in America, and Indiana doesn't have Ohio State's resources. Although they've ponied up money for Cignetti, they've ponied up money for Bryant Haynes, they've ponied up money for their strength and conditioning coach, and I imagine other assistants like Mike Shanahan, for example. So maybe Indiana could fend Ohio State off. That sounds like alternate history, but it could be the reality. But you should still call them. It's the same thing with Alan Clark at Texas. If Texas wants him and they get on it, they can probably match Ohio State's offer, but you still make the call. Terrence Jamison, if his unit, after all they lose, has a big year at Illinois, I think that's definitely a rising name to consider. And then this is out of left field, but still, we've seen Ohio State and Michigan poach coaches before. Ironically enough, they didn't either work out or last all that long. Greg Madison retired shortly after Ohio State poached him. Al Washington overall was a disaster. And Tony Alford, honestly, it looked like Ohio State won that war, where they upgraded at running backs coach. And Michigan, I think, got a good running backs coach, but someone who I don't know and I don't think they are as good as Ohio State's Carlos Loughlin, who they got from Oregon. But still, Lou Esposito, I think, is one of the best D-line coaches in the business in terms of development. At Ohio State, you'll get a recruiting edge over what you already have at Michigan. You have good NIL, and you have a defensive coordinator in Matt Patricia, who right now is actually trying to help out Larry Johnson recruit and is involved in recruiting, unlike Jim Knowles, the prior DC. So maybe you just offer him a boatload of money if he does well after Michigan lost three NFL draft picks, 2 of them in the first round, and their unit does well. Why not? Maybe it can help get the mental edge back over Michigan. I think that would be a fantastic move by Ohio State, honestly, if they were to pull that off and, in my opinion, steal away Michigan's best assistant coach right now in Lou Esposito. So those are some names just to float out there. Ultimately, 2025 will decide Larry Johnson's fate, whether or not the defensive line is a strength or weakness on defense or on the team as a whole. It doesn't look too good right now by Ohio State standards, but Only time will tell, and you'll know pretty quickly against Texas, who they lose a bunch on the O-line, yes, but depth is not a concern for the Texas offensive line with how they've recruited and with how they've developed. Not a concern one bit. So they're going to go up against a competent unit and a good quarterback and a great staff and an awesome roster in week one. You will know a lot about each Ohio State position group right out of the gate, which is good if you want answers about the team. And, you know, as a fan of a team in Michigan who's had to go through pretty weak non-conference schedules or even weak conference schedules and wait until November to figure out who exactly you are, sometimes it's just refreshing to know out of the gate, like Michigan with Texas last year, oh, this is the level we are capable of winning at. And anything beyond that, we're not capable of winning right now. We're capable of being this team, but not this team. Ohio State will get that same experience in 2025. Don't think they'll get the same result in that you'll realize, oh, well, 8-4 is probably the best case scenario, or maybe 9-3. I don't think it will be that way, but you'll have the same result in that you will know who your team is in large part after the first few weeks of September, or in this case, the first week of September. That will also apply to Larry Johnson's unit. I think there are plenty of quality candidates who could be upgrades over him, who could replace him, and some of them are at schools where they don't have the purchasing power and they don't have the retention power that Ohio State does. So they could go out to a smaller school, get a higher quality coach, and make an upgrade without having much competition. And that's probably what will happen, or maybe they'll go out of the box. I mean, I didn't see Matt Patricia coming. I don't think a lot of people did until news was reported that it was basically when, not if. So to answer your question, I'm close to being out on him, Gyro. And as for who should replace him, I think that's too early of a question to answer. There's a lot of capable names, and Ohio State will select one of them. Next up on the chopping block, Penn State. Then we'll get to a few other teams. Let's look at the chat right now. I imagine that it is buzzing. Indeed, it is. Let me see. Go through the chat here. Someone's talking about Georgia fans for some reason. I don't know exactly why. Dog had dental surgery today. I pick him up in 10 minutes. Well, I hope that he recovers rather nicely, Husker Chuck. I'll be praying for him. Hope that he has a good recovery. You can't get above mediocre until you start beating Iowa. Yes, you said this on the Corn Nation show that you and I were both on, which was a splendid time. Wisconsin is absolutely not Nebraska's biggest rival. I agree with that. I mean, they didn't even agree to play each other every year. So that says something. Hi Doreen. Nice to see you in here. You don't know, said no thanks for some reason. Oh, that might be the shout out corn crazed one that Armand Hammer said. The Georgia fans was when the dog was barking. Oh, yes, that makes sense. That's pretty funny. Yeah, because the Georgia fans keep barking and barking and barking. I remember that video where it was at Sanford Stadium and this reporter was asking a Georgia fan something and just said, "Go Dogs," and then started barking in a super deep voice. That was funny. All right, next up on the chopping block is Penn State and whether or not their new wide receivers will help Drew Allar step up in big games. Will Penn State's new wide receivers help fix a problem of Penn State's that's been nagging them for 2 years? That problem being Drew Allar, phenomenal talent, has improved every year, and I think especially in year 2 of Andy Krolnicki's system, you will see further improvements. But in the biggest games, whether against Ohio State and Michigan in 2023, or against Ohio State, even Illinois, Oregon, and in the playoffs in 2024, he just doesn't play at the same level. Now, to be fair, in part that's expected because you're playing tougher competition. But Allar has never passed for greater than a 140 passer rating in big games, even against Illinois, who last year had a good team, an above average team, but not a great team. not an elite team, not anything close to an elite team. I mean, if Penn State had a kicker in that game, if they started Ryan Barker at kicker in that game, they would have won by 3 scores instead of 2. And the game would have been viewed as over well before the final few minutes of the fourth quarter, when it actually was clear that Penn State was going to win. That's a good question right there. Whether or not new wide receivers can help Allar take that step forward, because receiver has been an issue at Penn State, but Allar's also had games where he's inaccurate, very inconsistent, and just does not look like the 5-star tabbed as a future first-round quarterback that many said he was out of high school. So looking at this new wide receiver core that Penn State has, they brought in Trevor Pena, they brought in Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson from Syracuse, Troy, and USC, respectively. They lost Harrison Wallace to the portal to Ole Miss, and they lost Omari Evans to Washington. I think they definitely upgraded there. And there's a redshirt freshman in Tyseer Denmark who was recruited highly at a high school, had an Ohio State offer, for example. He will probably be in the rotation as well. This is certainly a deeper wide receiver room, and a wide receiver room with much higher upside than Penn State had last year, where against Notre Dame, they didn't have a single completed pass to a wide receiver of more than 0 yards. They did not have a positive reception to a wide receiver. I think Harrison Wallace technically had a reception, but it was for negative yardage per the stat sheet, per the box score of ESPN for that Orange Bowl. That in that game, I will tell you, if Penn State had Carnell Tate, and not Carnell Tate of this season, who's expected to be a first-round talent, but Carnell Tate of last season, who was near elite, potentially elite, but who wasn't Jeremiah Smith and wasn't Emeka Egbuka. Those are clearly the 2 best Ohio State wide receivers. If they have Carnell Tate, I'll go even further and say if they had Brandon Inniss, or if they had true freshman Mylan Graham, who wasn't even on campus for a full year, they probably beat Notre Dame. Probably. They probably, if I'm being honest, they may have beaten Ohio State. If they had Carnell Tate in the regular season, they absolutely beat Ohio State. I mean, Penn State's wide receivers in that game were running into each other. They clearly didn't know what was going on. And that fade in the end zone, which Davison Igbinosun made an incredible interception off of, that was a perfectly thrown ball. Harrison Wallace should have caught that. And if Tate was wide receiver 1 instead of Wallace, they catch that. And Penn State enters halftime with a lead. And you know what? They probably win that game. Or at least it's a game in the final seconds. And maybe Ohio State has to kick a game-winning field goal, or Penn State kicks the game-winning field goal. It was the ultimate handicap of the 2024 Penn State roster, which I thought at moments last year looked like the best roster in America. At the end of the day, that was Ohio State. And I think Texas had a better roster too. But with Abdul Carter, with Tyler Warren, with Kobe King, Zane Durant, with an offensive line that led Penn State to be top 20 in yards per carry, with a respectively tough schedule, and with no wide receivers to help them. So teams stacked the box against Penn State. Sometimes didn't matter. They still ran it very well. They had so many good players and a really good coaching staff. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough. They should have been in that national championship game. They should have won the Big Ten. The power ratings at the end of the year said, at least per FPI, S&P Plus says that Oregon was better than Penn State, but FBI said at the end of the year that Penn State was the superior team to Oregon in power ratings. And you know what? Honestly, given the Rose Bowl outcome, I think that makes some sense. So adding a receiver in Pena that had nearly 1,000 yards last year, had 84 receptions and 9 touchdowns, is big. He played in a pass-heavy system, yes, but it's not like Syracuse had all the talent in the world either. And entering 2024, or maybe it was in 2023, he was on some freaks lists, and he was an all-ACC player last year. Kyle McCord's one of his best receivers. I know that Syracuse had another wide receiver who went to the NFL. Name sadly escapes me. They had a lot of good wide receivers, and their wide receivers coach is now the wide receivers coach at Oregon, which shows how highly thought of he is in, top college football circles. They didn't just add Pena, though, and they paid good money to get Pena, 7 figures, I believe, or at least I speculate. Devontae Ross was added in the winter window from Troy, 76 receptions, 1,043 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns, 13.7 yards per reception. He torched Iowa's defense and also had a touchdown return, a punt return for a touchdown on special teams. So definitely someone who can compete with some of the better defensive athletes in the Big Ten. Shorter guy, but fast, speedy guy. I really like what he brings to Penn State. And then they got Kyron Hudson in the portal, who's more of a big possession wide receiver. Made that awesome one-handed catch against LSU. Now, LSU didn't have the best defense in the world. It was still a really impressive catch on a throw that wasn't really good and that was risky. And most other quarterbacks either wouldn't have made, and if they did, most receivers in college football certainly wouldn't have caught that ball. Hudson had 38 receptions for 462 yards, 3 touchdowns, and averaged 12.2 yards per reception. What we have heard, and I've heard this from Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast, I've heard it from looking at different websites and articles and what other analysts besides myself think, everyone likes the USC wide receivers they got in the portal. Georgia's going to start Zachariah Branch. Florida State's going to start Deuce Robinson. They like them. And Penn State likes Kyron Hudson, and they're going to start him. And USC's receivers they retained, Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, were the best of the bunch last year. These are not bad receivers, the USC backups last year, even though they, didn't break records or all get 1,000 receiving yards, and Kyron Hudson didn't even get 500, only got 3 receiving touchdowns. They left because they wanted more playing time. And they also left, I think, because Penn State and Florida State and Georgia needed receivers. They needed desperately upgrades at receivers. They were willing to pay good money. And I think USC may also have some players that we just don't know about yet in that receiver ready to emerge. We're talking about Penn State here, though. I think that to a certain degree, to answer your question here, this question, by the way, was asked by Drew Allar season. Good Twitter account, and he's also a member of our Discord server. Speaking of which, check the link in the description. The Discord server link, it's named. It's obvious. You can see it if you read carefully. And join that and type in a question that you have in our hashtag YouTube mailbox channel. And like Drew Allar season, you can ask me a question and I will make a video out of it. To answer your question, will Penn State's new wide receivers help Allar step up in big games? To a point, they absolutely will. Because Allar has made some nice throws. Against USC and Oregon, he made some beautiful throws. He made one beautiful throw even against Ohio State. It was where Tyler Warren was matched up against Lathan Ransom. Warren won the one-on-one. Didn't make too many good throws in that game, but he made one there. You see the potential with Allar, and if he did have better weapons, I think that would help him out a lot. But also, to a certain degree, it's on him to step up in big games. You can't have those weird throws off platform, or where the mechanics break down, or where he's under duress and it clearly affects how he throws. And by clearly affects, I mean affects him more than it does other top-tier quarterbacks when they're under pressure. Will Howard at Ohio State, for example, I think did a much better job with accuracy and pocket awareness and staying strong and keeping his mechanics up to standard. And he's not as talented of a quarterback as Allar is. Allar has way more NFL potential. And certainly if Howard had Allar's supporting cast, he wouldn't have been as good as he was at Ohio State. That's for sure. However, Howard played to his ceiling. Howard was gutsy. Howard did what the staff asked him to do. He operated in the system rather well. To a certain degree, I don't know if Allar has done that at Penn State entirely or not. The Notre Dame game, for example, was bad. It was bad. Now, Notre Dame had one of the better secondaries in football last year, but it wasn't an elite secondary. And Ohio State and USC proved that. Any, and I mean this, any passing offense that had capable receivers blew that secondary to shreds. Any of them. I mean, Indiana, and Indiana's very talent limited. Indiana did a better job against Ohio State's offense than Notre Dame did. Way better of a job. Now, part of that was because Ohio State's offensive line dealt with, the Seth McLaughlin injury a few days before the Indiana game. But also, I think I think Indiana's defense was up there with Notre Dame's, worse talent-wise, but I think in some cases better in other areas, particularly the run defense and the defensive line. So talent in that example, it means a lot, but it's also not everything. That's why Indiana went 11-2 last year and blew out everyone who had similar or inferior talent to them. It's also why, for example, just to mention something, it's why Michigan's done very well on the defensive line. They haven't recruited above 40% of their defensive line being blue chip players in recent memory, and yet they have first rounders, or at least, day 3 NFL picks all the time on that D-line because they develop well there. So with Allar and the wide receivers, to a certain degree, it's a lack of talent, recruiting-wise, or even from Allar's perspective, just talent in general to help him out. But also it's on Allar to make sure he does everything he can to improve. And as for the wide receivers, I think they're going to help for sure. I think this year against Oregon and against Ohio State, Allar will perform better against those teams to a much, much better degree than he did last year, but I don't know that for sure. And Allar last year was gutsier, made better decisions, and was also more aggressive than he was the year prior. Some of those turned into risky throws and bad interceptions. So he needs to continue to make progress as well. He's far from a complete quarterback at this point, but a complete quarterback for him is round 1, pick 1 potential. So that's my answer to your question. I think the wide receivers for Penn State will be not just a good unit this year, I think they'll be a great unit this year. I think this is a great wide receiver room that will give most secondaries, if not all secondaries they play, some problems. It's not Ohio State caliber, but no one's wide receiver room is Ohio State's caliber. And with what Penn State has at quarterback in Allar, and also the offensive line, which had some struggles in pass blocking last year, but they bring everyone back, have a lot of tight ends, very deep, talented tight end room. I think that Allar's entire supporting cast will improve. And on top of being in Kolonicki's system for a second year, I think that'll help him take a step forward as well. All right, up next, this is an interesting question, one that I'm very, very excited to answer. Who will have the better bounce back season between USC and the Michigan Wolverines? Let's dive into it. So Michigan and USC last year were ultimate disappointments, not just by their standard, but by preseason standards. USC was a preseason top 25 team. Michigan was preseason top 10, and they finished at least a full standard deviation below where a lot of people expected them to finish. I got USC right. I said that's a 500 team, or maybe even a 5-7 team in the preseason with their move to the Big Ten, the travel, the fact that it was only year 1 of the elite defensive staff and they lost so much on offense. I was very wrong on Michigan preseason, although I adjusted pretty quickly to the fact that they weren't better than 8-4, or maybe 9-3 with everything going right for them. And not everything went right for them. Same thing with USC. Lincoln Riley, not to go off on a tangent here too much, but historically, including the 2024 season, he's won around 70% of his close games. And yet USC lost to Michigan, Minnesota, Maryland, Washington, all in close games. They lost to Penn State too, 5th close game. And the Notre Dame game was technically not a 1-score loss, but they were driving, ready to tie it up, and then pick 6. So I would count that as a close game too. Not 7. Put that down. But they almost lost some additional games. Like, could have lost to LSU, could have lost to Texas A&M. They had 2 close wins and then 6 close losses. It's crazy. And then not even just 2 close wins. They also beat UCLA by only 6 points. Even with that many close games being played, Riley, given his history, given the talent that USC has and the staff that they had, and the O-line and Woody Marks, who I thought was just a dog at running back, just an awesome, give it your all, X-Factor caliber player, they should have went better than 6-6, and Michigan should have went better than 7-5. I mean, if Michigan just got Kyle McCord out of the portal and maybe another tackle to just better protect him than how Michigan's tackles protected their quarterbacks, Michigan could have, maybe flirted with the college football playoff at points last season instead of being out of it well before November. For USC, if Riley ran the ball more last year and maybe USC goes with Maava to open the year, or maybe their portal additions on defense pan out better, just, little things that could have been done differently or in a different universe. Well, something just clicks that didn't click. Wasn't the staff's fault or players' fault, but you know how things are. Stuff that's outside of the team's control. Well, they probably flirt with the college football playoff and are out of it before the month of November. And their preseason win totals suggest, Michigan's at 8.5 and USC's at 7.5, that while these teams should be better than last year, they may not quite be there yet in terms of reaching the expectations of what their blue blood histories provide, of the standard at USC and the standard at Michigan, in Ann Arbor, and in Los Angeles. So this question was asked by someone who's actually helped me a little bit out with streaming, given me some quality advice. Jester's Jinx, who's made appearances on Darren Talks Ball, as well as someone making videos, used to play college football. He asks a question. He's a Michigan fan for context. Who has the better bounce back year, USC or Michigan? So I can go about this a multitude of ways. If you're talking about power ratings, if that's what you're discussing, the odds say that it's going to be Michigan. I think if you're talking about bouncing back relative to how many wins gained compared to last year, I think you're talking about USC, because they lost an additional game in the regular season, and USC and Michigan play each other, and USC hosts Michigan. And teams on the East Coast or West Coast typically don't have a good time traveling out to the other coast and winning. So following that logic, USC kind of has a +2 gain on Michigan in a sense. Like, they lost an additional game last year, and then they'll probably be favored in this year's game. It'll be much easier for USC to win more games relative to last year's record than for Michigan to do the same thing, if that makes sense. Like, the margin of wins gained for USC has a much larger chance of being higher, I think, than the margin of wins gained for Michigan, just because USC's schedule in terms of travel, in terms of competition, I think it's a little bit easier. On top of that, they host Michigan, and they have more to gain than Michigan does, because Michigan had a winning record last year and USC was at 500. If you're talking about straight up who is going to have the better record, then that would likely be Michigan by win total. So there's a variety of ways you can attack this question. I'm just going to assume you're going by wins gained, because I think that would be the most common way of looking at this, and that's also what matters. Strength of schedule and power ratings are more so a tiebreaker for reaching the college football playoff or being viewed as a better team in terms of achievement. And record, wins and losses, as long as the schedules don't have a massive disparity, like let's say Indiana and Ohio State last year. As long as they're somewhat close, maybe USC is a top 50 schedule and Michigan's is top 25. Like, there's a noticeable gap, but it's not Indiana being outside the top 100 and Ohio State being inside the top 10 as they're about to play against each other. Then wins and losses are typically what a lot of people use as a comparison, whether rightfully or wrongly. And a team can be lower in power ratings and still better meet expectations than a team that's higher in power ratings, even if their expectations are an identical record. Maybe the team with a higher power rating loses more close games, and the team with the lower power rating wins more close games, but also plays in more close games with a weaker schedule, suggesting that they're a worse quality team. But they are doing a better job of being clutch and punching above their weight class than the team that is, better than them and definitely in terms of power ratings superior to them in terms of analytics. Maybe that's me rambling too much, but there's just so many ways you can attack this question. I wanted to get all of them out of the way. I have not given out my preseason Big Ten predictions yet. However, I will say that these staffs are pretty equal. They are good staffs, maybe great. I would say that USC's has the edge over Michigan. I still think that USC has some newer, younger coaches that are unproven that maybe weigh down their staff more than Michigan. Michigan, I don't think, has the same amount of new and young names. They have more staff continuity than USC does, which is surprising because USC has a lot of staff continuity. Michigan really just lost their OC, Kurt Campbell, fired him and then replaced him with Chip Lindsey. USC lost their strength and conditioning coach, lost their corners coach, lost their offensive line coach, and de jure offensive coordinator, but Riley was the de facto OC. He calls the plays. USC is a slightly better staff in my mind, and I'll go more in depth with this when I release my predictions and also do deep dives on specific teams. But I think D'Anton Lynn is a better DC than Wink Martindale. And I think that Riley is a better play caller than Chip Lindsey and also a better head coach than Sherrone Moore is. I think a large part of the reason why Moore beat Riley last season is because Michigan's roster was legitimately that much more talented and physical than USC's was. USC in the game last year in their matchup was very mentally tough, and they were trying to be as physically tough as possible, and I think they were physically tough. But Michigan has been in their current identity. They were in that game for 4 years. 4 years. And they returned a lot of high-caliber NFL players. USC did not return a lot of high-caliber NFL players. In fact, they lost the same amount of production as Michigan did entering 2024, and Michigan lost a ton. And USC had to deal with the travel, the home field environment, and Michigan really being in year, I would say like 4 or not even that. You could say that they were in year 10 of things. If you want to argue that Sherrone Moore is just a continuation of the Harbaugh era, at least that's what the goal is, maybe reaching the title again and winning with physical football with some adjustments. Riley changed everything entering 2024. I mean, parting with Grinch and that style of defense. This season, he kind of hit the nail on the head, pushed the nail, hit the final nail in the coffin with firing Benny Wiley, who has been with him forever at Oklahoma and USC as his strength and conditioning coach. I mean, he changed everything entering 2024. It was really year one for him, and year one with USC in this new era. So Michigan was further ahead of USC. But USC clearly, whether it was power ratings or when you watched them, they had an upside to them and a completeness to them that Michigan did not, roster-wise. So looking at 2025, who will have the better bounce-back year? I think that Michigan will have the better defense. I think that USC will have the better offense. Quarterback, USC is more proven there, but Underwood, make no mistake, is more talented than Maava. Running back, now I'm going through all the positions, and I'll just finish it out this way. Running back, I'd say depth USC, overall number 1 to be determined. A lot of potential there. O-line Michigan, but USC quietly has a good O-line even with all they lost. Could easily be better than Michigan's. Wide receivers, definitely USC by a mile. Michigan's unit's bad there. Tight end is Michigan. D-tackle and D-end are Michigan. Linebacker, Michigan has the depth, but Eric Gentry would be Michigan's best linebacker by a decent margin. Safety, USC, and then corner, I would say Michigan, and then special teams, Michigan. Michigan should, in terms of roster composition, should be better than USC, but USC's staff is better, so they'll probably manage the talent better. Michigan returns more production than USC, but it's not like they're returning 70 or 80%. USC's returning 40%. It's more Michigan's returning in the 60s, USC's returning in the high 40s, lower 50s. So taking all of those things into consideration, that USC will probably manage their talent better. They have more proven production at QB. Their staff is a little bit better. They host Michigan, and they have more to gain in terms of gained wins compared to the prior season than Michigan does because they had a worse record. I would say it's more likely that USC is the better bounce-back season. And that's not me saying Michigan won't bounce back. I think Michigan will win more than 7 games this year. In fact, I will say that they will win more than 8 games this season. I'm talking about 9 wins or more is what Michigan will earn. But if USC simply earns 8 wins, well, they've matched Michigan's gained wins. And then if they have the head-to-head win over Michigan in that scenario, let's say, well, then they've beaten them head-to-head. That's the tiebreaker. They then have the better bounce-back year. If USC goes 9-3 and Michigan goes 9-3, USC is the better bounce-back year. So I think it's slightly more likely that USC is the better bounce-back year. I will say that I'm more confident that Michigan's going to be the better team than USC, than I am confident in USC having the better bounce-back year. But I'm confident in both statements. Michigan's going to be better than USC in a power rating sense and an overall sense, and also that USC will have the better bounce-back season. They have more to gain, and I think that their schedule is more workable in a sense, particularly because they host Michigan, and they host them in an environment that is going to be different from Michigan in a climate sense and is several time zones away. And USC also gets Michigan off of a bye. So that game should be a USC win, and that alone can push USC to having more gained wins, just 1 or 2 more than what Michigan does relative to the 2024 season. So that's my answer to your question, Jester's Jinx. I think that Michigan will have a good bounce back year, but USC's bounce back year will be even better. All right, on to Illinois. On to the Fighting Illini. Can Illinois reach the college football playoff? That's a question that has been asked by so many different people, and the answer's been a resounding yes. But I want to go a little bit more in depth than most people and maybe add a sense of realism to this. Nick P., an Indiana fan, and he's asked another question that I'll make into a video about Illinois, specifically involving Indiana's matchup with Illinois, because he's an Indiana Hoosiers fan. He asked, verbatim, can Illinois make the college football playoff in 2025? And I think that, they can, and that's the same answer on a general basis that most people have given to this question. But I want to go more in depth, because a lot of people are talking about Illinois as this playoff sleeper, as 2025's Indiana, and giving a lot of affection and a lot of praise to Illinois. I imagine Brett Bielema hates it, because Illinois hasn't finished ranked in a season when they started out ranked in the preseason polls since before 2000. Fun fact from Tom Fornelli. Thank you very much, Cover 3 podcast. Should give them a listen. Very entertaining group of people, a lot of different perspectives. Don't always agree with them, but I do agree with Tom's concern on that point, him being an Illinois fan, a passionate one at that. They can reach the college football playoff. I mean, they finished 10-3 last year, 6-3. They were 5th in the Big Ten. If the predicted 16-team college football playoff that many are expecting, even the 14-team model that should exist and should be implemented in 2026 were implemented last season, and you include the play-in games for the playoffs that the Big Ten wants to roll out, Illinois, they would have played Ohio State for a right to go to the playoffs last year. Ohio State, I think, would have won quite handily in the same way they beat Tennessee, but still, they were in the mix for getting one of the better non-playoff bowls, and if they somehow, some way, either beat Minnesota or maybe pulled off an upset against Oregon or Penn State, they could have been in the playoffs last year. They won a lot of close games, they lost a close game, and then they beat South Carolina, who many viewed as deserving of a playoff spot in the postseason. Yes, South Carolina had opt-outs, but so did Illinois. And they bring back 75% of their 2024 production. Factoring in transfers, yes, but they return Luke Altmaier, basically their entire secondary, much of their linebacker core, their offensive line, 2 out of their 3 rotated running backs. I mean, this team will improve power ratings-wise. They will perform at a higher level in big games for sure. Their ceiling will be higher, and their floor will also be higher. When you return that much production, that's what almost always happens. However, that does not mean they will have a superior record. It doesn't. Let me explain. In 2023, Iowa finished the regular season with a 10-2 record. They brought back nearly 80% of their production entering 2024, and they went 8-4. They were power rated top 25, almost top 20 in 2024. They were not even power rated top 30. I don't even think top 40 in 2023. Some of that was they played a little bit of a tougher schedule. However, another part of that was they won a bunch of close games in 2023. And then they lost all of their close games, or almost all of them, in 2024. Close games often involve a lot of different things that are outside of the team's control, or I think, to put it more accurately and to be more respectful of the game and effort, and I don't like bringing up luck. I typically don't. So I'll recant that statement I made a few seconds ago and adjust it and say that close games often involve a lot of quick decision making and a lot of little decisions that end up making a big outcome in an addition of 1 to the W column or an addition of 1 to the L column. A lot of decisions that if you could make them again, you'd do differently. Or even if you had to make that decision again with the same amount of reaction time allowed, you'd make a different decision because, you're in the moment. There's adrenaline. There's different adjustments and tactics you have to think about. All these things have an effect. And Illinois made the ball bounce their way a lot of the time last year. Sometimes the ball bounced their way just in general. Not saying this in a lucky sense, but maybe a team made a bad decision and Illinois made a good one. You can't always count on that to happen. That's why the law of close games exists. You win a bunch of close games one year, the following year, maybe the opponents you play in a close game do a better job of making decisions, and you do a worse job of making better decisions than you and your opponents did against each other the prior year. And as a result, maybe you're a better team in year 1 or year 2 compared to year 1 of this sample, but you lose more games because in the moments that decide close games, you make worse decisions or your opponents make better decisions, or maybe something really lucky, truly lucky does happen and it benefited you the prior year and it doesn't benefit you this year. That could happen to Illinois, and that is why while my answer is yes, they can, my answer is no, they won't. They can. In fact, a lot of teams, since it's a 12-team college football playoff, can contend for it. But there are people who are talking about Illinois this year like if the 4-team playoff existed, they'd be a contender. And to answer that question, my answer would be no, they couldn't. And I will say here, they can make the 12-team playoff. I would love to see them reach the 12-team playoff. It'd be an awesome story. I'm rooting for it to happen. But I don't think it will. I don't think that they will make the 12-team playoff. In fact, I don't even think they'll come close. They went 9-3 last year. They were not ranked inside the top 16. If they go 9-3 again, it'll probably be the same story. And the law of close games says, along with their win total, that 8-4 is more likely than 9-3. At 8-4, they may not even be ranked in the top 25. There was no team last season with 4 losses that was ranked in the top 25 in the final college football playoff rankings. No team, for the first time in years, no team was ranked in the final college football playoff rankings on Selection Sunday with more than 3 losses. Even LSU at the end of the year with a 9-4 record playing in America's toughest conference, the SEC. By toughest, I mean top down. Big Ten is better top teams. Just wanted to make that statement clear. They were not even ranked. Michigan, who beat top 5 in power ratings, Alabama and Ohio State back to back, 8-5, not close to being ranked. Just as an example of that. So the Illini need to go 10-2, or more preferably 11-1, to guarantee a college football playoff spot. Let's say Indiana steps back. USC doesn't have a really good year. Washington just maybe wins 6 games again or only 7, and Wisconsin is a losing record. And Duke takes a big step back. And then they win all those games. They go 11-1, but Ohio State beats them by 28 points. It would be exactly like Indiana's resume last year. Exactly like that. Just as weak in that hypothetical. And with what Illinois returns, with what they showed us last year as to who they are and their schedule and how just all these things work out, they can make the playoffs. But I'm going to tell you something that I don't think anyone else has said, or most of anyone else, at least in the college football analyst space, the YouTube accounts, the Twitter accounts, On3, 24/7 Sports, any of that. I'm telling you right now, they will not make the playoffs with who they were last year and what they're bringing back. They will not make the playoffs. They can, and I hope they do, but I don't think they will. I think their D-line has major areas of concern, especially at D-tackle. I think that their offensive line, it was awful in pass blocking last year, and in run blocking it was just okay. There's some limitations with that O-line. They lost Pat Bryant, who was a draft pick, and Zachary Franklin, who was an undrafted free agent. They have a lot to replace at wide receiver, and I don't think Hudson Clement, who they got from West Virginia, is as good as either of those two who departed. So Illinois is a good team. They're going to be better than they were last year power ratings-wise. I have no doubt that they will play Ohio State more competitively this season than they played Oregon last season. No doubt about that. They may even play them better than they played Penn State last year, where, yes, they were constantly within striking distance against Penn State, but you could tell in watching the TV that Penn State was the far better team. Maybe Illinois will play Ohio State more competitively than they played Penn State last year, and that was a somewhat competitive game. But in terms of wins and losses, I think they're going to have the same record or worse record. That's why Vegas has the win total set this way. They are aware of the law of close games and the historical fact as well, which doesn't have a lot of input, but some, that Illinois, when they start ranked, typically doesn't finish ranked. I'm not even saying that'll happen this year. I'm just saying that 7-5, 8-4 is more likely than 10-2 or 11-1. 9-3 with Illinois is not getting you in the playoffs. So can they make it? I guess so, but it's not a confident yes from me, and I don't think they'll make it. I think Altmaier is a great quarterback, could be an elite one, and I think their secondary is in totality, I think it's the Big Ten's best. I think Penn State is the only team that depth-wise can compete with their secondary. Ohio State, on account of their upside, could compete as well. Maybe the same with Michigan, maybe Minnesota with Coy Parrish, but Illinois is the most proven secondary right now in the Big Ten. But their problem is a little bit the trenches and also wide receivers and just their talent limitations. And I don't think their staff is elite either. They have a lot going against them when it comes to the Illini reaching the college football playoff. I think Bielema is a good coach, and I think that while Illinois will be a better team than last year, I think they'll follow the path of 2024 Iowa, where they'll get better in terms of power ratings and in terms of performance in big games and in terms of their ability to maybe dominate inferior opponents instead of playing them close. But when they face off against equal competition, I don't think they'll win as many close ones against equal competition as they did the prior season. So can they make it, Nick P., to answer your question? I mean, yeah, they can. I hope it happens, but I don't think they will. I think you're looking at 8-4, 7-5, or 9-3 again. I think 10-2 and 11-1 is much more improbable than many, even in the analyst and pundit class and even in the advanced analytics class, are saying is likely. And last but not least, we'll talk about whether or not Sherrone Moore survives the season at Michigan. This question was once again submitted by an Indiana fan, not Nick P., different Indiana fan. Let me read the chat before we get to this. Someone said Iowa's owned us. Illinois had 20 plus off-season surgeries, most being shoulders. 0 is known as the status of those players. Oh, I didn't even think of that. That's a good. Thank you for pointing that out, Jason. That's good. Big difference. Iowa's QB sucked. Altmaier is serviceable. That's very true, but I will also say that Iowa returned an elite defense and Illinois just returns an above average defense. So in a lot of ways, like power ratings wise, 2024 Illinois was pretty close to 2023 Iowa. I would say 2024 Illinois certainly had a higher upside because of the QB, but remember, Iowa returned an elite defense and special teams in 24. Their defense actually took a slight step back. Special teams was good. O-line took a huge step forward, and Caleb Johnson emerged as a freak. And even considering all those things, Iowa went 8-4. So I think it's more likely than not Illinois regresses in terms of wins and losses than they make the playoff. Illinois will take a small step back record-wise this year. Like you said, a regression of the mean and close games combined with the added spotlight means they'll disappoint slightly. But Colby Vlach, thank you for being a moderator, and I agree. Sam, is it going to take us a year to fix our special teams at Nebraska? I will answer that in the final minutes of the show with the Q&A session. Remember, if you want your question to be answered, because I have limited time, if you want a guaranteed answer, send a super chat with your question, and I am obligated to answer your question there. All right, let's talk about whether or not Sherrone Moore survives the season at Michigan. There have been rumors. There's been talk. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding Michigan, whether it's about the cheating scandal, whether it's about disappointing in 2024. There's just been a lot of talk, a lot of, you could even say, drama about Michigan. In large part, I think that term is accurate. I think a lot of it is drama. I just want to get this question out of the way because it's been asked, and I want to at least, talk about Michigan before the whole hearing that takes place in early June, which a lot of people who have talked about Michigan are also talking about, often in reference to. This question is from Eric, actually an Indiana fan, and he asks, does Sherrone Moore survive the season at Michigan? If you want to ask your own question and have it turned into a video, just click the Discord server link via the video description. You'll join the Discord server automatically, and it's free. And then navigate to the YouTube mailbox channel and type in a question, and I will make a video out of it, especially since it's this early in the preseason. I'll make it pretty easy to make a video out of it before September, before late August when the season kicks off. Sherrone Moore's record, official record at Michigan, is 9-5, 1 win in 23, 8-5 record in 2024, with a 5-4 record, should say 5-4, not 4-5, in Big Ten Conference play, and he has a 1-2 record versus top 10 teams. And by that I mean in terms of like AP standing. So lost to Texas and Oregon last year, but beat Ohio State. In terms of the power ratings, he went 2-2 in top 10 games, lost to Texas and Oregon, but beat Alabama and Ohio State, who were top 10 in FPI. It's a fascinating question, whether he survives the season or not. My opinion with the whole punishments that Michigan will receive, I haven't been very public about it, per se, because I just kind of want to wait. And because there's a lot of these accounts who are insisting that I'm like this super biased pro-Michigan person, which is pretty hilarious because I've picked these often are sadly Ohio State accounts, and I say sadly because Ohio State's a wonderful fan base. A lot of them are sadly Ohio State accounts, and they accuse me of being biased despite the fact that I've picked Ohio State to beat Michigan 3 out of their past 4 matchups, and Ohio State's been 0-4 with their staff in at least 2 of the matchups kind of acting like idiots in regards to the game. So that, I just want to get that out of the way. That's stupid. But I don't want them, like, because they will, this specific type of person will be snowballing in my mentions or the mentions of any show that didn't say that Michigan would get destroyed. So that's part of the reason why I've been ignoring it, because it's just not fun. It's boring. And the insinuation is that if Michigan's terrible, well, they'll never beat Ohio State, which is hilarious because guess who beat Ohio State last year when they were pretty pathetic? Oh, Michigan. Nebraska also did as well. Just to point that out. But since you asked, Eric, I am going to give an answer and say that as of right now, I think that what the NCAA will do, the only punishment that they will give out that I think will have a tangible effect on Michigan is in regards to Sherrone Moore. This is staying consistent with what Pete Thamel said a year ago, and Pete Thamel's plugged in. I have no idea how anyone can think that certain smaller accounts on Twitter somehow know more than Pete Thamel does. If those accounts are being fed information, guess who else is being fed information? Well, Pete Thamel. because Pete Thamel is a bigger audience. He can make more money off of this. It's the same thing with Josh Pate. It's the same with others. Like, it's way too convenient for specific accounts of Michigan's rivals to know everything about the sign stealing scandal. It's like Michigan accounts saying they know everything about the Nassar scandal or about Michigan State's notice of allegations. Like, you look at that and you think, well, geez, you totally don't have any incentive to say that your rival's going to get destroyed and they'll never beat you again. It's just my thoughts. So inconsistency of what Pate, who's right on a lot of things, and on Thamel, who's even more correct on a lot of things, inconsistency with what they say, I think that Michigan will receive some type of punishment. I think that for sure they deserve to receive some type of punishment. I mean, they cheated after all. It's like the same thing with Jim Tressel in Ohio State in Tattoo-Gate and in 2010, 2011. I thought their punishment was a bit too extreme. You know, you got Tressel to resign. You had the awful 2011 season. A lot of players left that, you know, didn't have to leave because they were suspended. And I think that was kind of, you know, in hindsight, I guess good enough of a punishment for Ohio State. I think the postseason ban was the excessive part of that whole punishment, especially with the new staff, with Urban Meyer and, you know, Tom Herman, Mike Vrabel, Luke Fickell remained, but, you know, one remaining staffer from the prior staffs, like, is what it is. It was a new staff. A lot of the players who played in 2012 were not receiving significant playing time or even played in 2010 or while the whole Tattoo-Gate thing was going on. Like, postseason ban was just stupid. Shouldn't have happened. NCAA should probably apologize to Ohio State for that whole thing. With Michigan, I'm kind of thinking in the realm that, you know, Michigan lost a lot of their staffers. They did, like Jim Harbaugh. OC Sherrone Moore of that team is still the head coach, but everyone else is basically gone. And look, they went 7-5 last year. A lot of their talent from the 21 to 23 seasons is gone. I don't know what Michigan should receive beyond the punishment of probably, in an ideal sense of in an ideal world, maybe you take away some scholarships from Michigan and give it to some other schools. But in the NIL era, that's basically nothing. So I don't know what other punishment would be appropriate otherwise than maybe you give Sherrone Moore more games where he's suspended, which, look, makes sense, especially since he was in contact with Stallions, and if they discover that, you know, he was deeply involved, well, yeah, like, that's appropriate. And if he was deeply involved and lied about it, then he should be fired, because you can't lead, you can't be dishonest. You just can't. Honestly. Like, that's just wrong. To be involved in something that deep and then lie about it to the authority should result in that. But that's just the should. We haven't even gotten to what will or what could happen. I'm hearing people say they'll restrict Michigan's NIL. That's not going to hold up in court, because then you're restricting individual athletes' ability to earn money because the school they go to. Like, how is it fair to restrict Bryce Underwood's NIL deal because of actions that he didn't even commit, or that actions that took place while he was a junior in high school? Like, that would be not just unfair, it wouldn't hold up in court. So anyone saying that is probably not objective or not fully thinking it through. There's also the idea that Michigan will receive, like, a multi-year postseason ban. Well, Ohio State only received a 1-year postseason ban, and they had ineligible players. Michigan didn't have ineligible players. Ineligible players typically result in postseason bans. Tennessee, for example, had ineligible players under Jeremy Pruitt. They had 18 level 1 violations to Michigan's 6. Tennessee basically had to vacate wins, which typically is associated with ineligible players. They didn't receive a postseason ban, and things moved along. They had some severe scholarship limitations in year 1, but again, with the NIL era, after that year 1, that, you know, you don't even notice it. You don't even see it with Tennessee, that they're operating with 83 scholarships instead of 85. So what will happen versus what should happen will probably be different things. Ultimately, as to what will happen, I can't exactly give a prediction other than the fact that Michigan will not receive more than a 1-year postseason ban. And I'm only saying that because in case there's that 0.5% chance that some of the accounts that are rather biased say otherwise, that I can't give them the credit, then I won't have to give them the credit of I was wrong and they were right. Don't want to do that. Not in the interest of giving rather facetious individuals good standing. Not in the interest of doing that at all. So in the very conservative prediction, worst case scenario for Michigan's probably a 1-year postseason ban and or Sherrone Moore's fired. And even then, I don't know if they'd show cause him 2 months before the season kicked off. That would be unprecedented. So I'd actually say worst case scenario is probably postseason ban and suspended during games. And they'll probably do one or the other. Maybe I'm wrong. But intuitively, I think to myself that what Michigan's doing here by self-imposing penalties is they're kind of urinating on the NCAA's leg, in the sense that that's not a good way to appease them. You've been fighting them tooth and nail, and then you say we're going to self-impose like the weakest penalties in the world, basically a 1 week recruiting restriction, which is just pathetic. It's pathetic not in the sense that Michigan shouldn't receive any punishment at all. It's pathetic in the sense that you're not punishing yourself. You're just giving the illusion that you're punishing yourself. And then as for the 2 games in the fall, what are you doing? You're choosing the games in which you're suspended. How isn't that going to make the NCAA even angrier with you? Oh, we're going to self-suspend for Central Michigan and Nebraska, but we're going to have our head coach for the first 2 weeks and then every game after that. Like, what? What? That doesn't make sense to me. And either what that will result in is that will result in the NCAA leveraging harsher penalties, because honestly, that's basically Michigan, in my mind, giving the bird to the NCAA. If you're trying to appease the NCAA because they have mass power over you, and maybe my intuition is wrong, you'd suspend yourself for the maximum amount of games you could, like 4 or maybe even 6. And then, like, you'd institute harsher recruiting penalties. If you were getting the death penalty, like 2-year postseason ban, it's worth suspending your head coach for way more games than 2 and instituting harsher penalties. And maybe, Sherrone Moore resigns or something to prevent that from happening because the school forces him to, for example, rather than basically not being able to compete for titles at all, and even for Big Ten championships for 2 years. That's just my thought. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to the possibility of being wrong there. That's why I said there is that slight percent chance that, yeah, Michigan doesn't participate in the postseason, or they have, a fine that actually means something, or maybe Moore gets show caused, or, maybe somehow, some way, yeah, NIL's restricted, even though but that wouldn't hold up in court. The point I'm trying to make is Michigan, more likely than not, won't fire Sherrone Moore. Sherrone Moore won't be let go due to something relating to the sign stealing scandal, to the cheating scandal. What's more likely than that, I think, is that Michigan disappoints again and they realize Moore isn't the guy and they fire him. Michigan has staffing questions. They're starting a true freshman quarterback. They lost a bunch of studs on defense. People who talk to me or listen to the show often know I'm not very high on Michigan's staff, and I just think that, look, Michigan could go 7-5 this year. They could go 6-6. I think it's more likely they go 7-5, by the way, under their win total by 1.5 wins than they receive like a type of ban, like postseason ban or a show cause that would really affect their program's ceiling for a year. Not 2 years, like just a year. I think 7-5 is more likely than that. 6-6 might be more likely than that. I think Michigan could even go 6-6. I mean, what the staff did last year was an atrocity for the first part. They were saved by Dominic Zvada and an epic defense in terms of roster talent. The coaching defensively was subpar for the first half of the year. The offensive coaching was subpar for the whole season. Sherrone Moore couldn't manage timeouts properly, didn't know specific college football rules that Dan Lanning, for example, abused to help Oregon pull away in that game. And look, they won a lot of close games too. Now they lost a lot. They lost some close games like Illinois, Washington, Indiana, but Ohio State and Alabama were close wins. I mean, USC was a close win. Minnesota shouldn't have been close, but at the end of the day, it was. And Michigan needed, some weird stuff with an onside kick to not have to win in the final second of the game. So Michigan could go, as I've said earlier, 12-0. They could also go 7-5, 6-6. And if Michigan goes any less than, in my mind, 10-2 or maybe 9-3, season's an absolute failure. If they go 7-5 again, yes, Moore should be fired because this team should be better than last year's team with the far better quarterback play, with all that's returning on the O-line and at linebacker, at DB, with the upgrades made to the running back room, with the staff continuity, with a good incoming recruiting class, with Underwood and maybe a few other true freshmen contribute in good ways. And with Zvada coming back, and with an easier schedule where the only preseason surefire top 10 team you're going to be playing is Ohio State. And last year you played Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, and Indiana ended up being top 10. So will Sherrone Moore survive the season at Michigan? I'm going to say yes, but it's not like absolute confidence that he will. Again, maybe I am wrong about my intuition with the whole punishments for the cheating. I will say I think it's more likely Moore gets show cause than the postseason ban happens because he was involved in some way or another. Like, I don't know if he was in cahoots totally with Stallions. Likelihood says to a certain degree he probably was, but just the association with that isn't good, and that's something that the NCAA could totally leverage, I think, in a more real way than suspending them from postseason play when they don't even control the postseason. The college football playoff does. And if the college football playoff wanted to keep Michigan out of its system, they would have kept him out in 2023 when, all the evidence showed they cheated. They would have said, nope, you're not coming into our playoffs. And they can say that because they're their own organization in business. But the NCAA doesn't have control over that. The Big Ten didn't, and the Big Ten took immediate action, which was good and deserved on their part. So I'm going to say probably 8 out of 10 confidence that Sherrone Moore survives the season. That remaining 2 mostly being if he goes 7-5 again, which is a possibility. And at that point, I think a move would be made because his buyout's super low. And he's not viewed as a savior of Michigan football like Harbaugh was when he was hired, or that Harbaugh was viewed as his time ended at Michigan. Moore's just a guy who Michigan fans and Michigan elite and brass want to succeed, but ultimately if he gets in the way and there's grumblings from Underwood and grumblings from talent on defense and Michigan's recruiting class and the team just doesn't look good, well, they'll fire him and they'll hire someone else more likely than not. So that's my answer to your question, Eric. Very long-winded. I don't think Moore will get fired due to anything relating to the scandal. If he does, it'd certainly be unprecedented, but again, maybe I'm wrong. I think more likely than not, if he doesn't survive the year, it's due to having a poor performance, because he is not one of the best head coaches in the Big Ten or even the country, not even close. He has a lot to prove there. And this team did lose NFL talent. They did. And starting a true freshman quarterback, as we saw with Nebraska last year, doesn't always earn you the Trevor Lawrence experience. So that's my answer to your question. I think Sherrone Moore will stay beyond 2025, but there is a chance, given what happened last year, that yes, he could be fired. All right. Alrighty, we're done with that. Now let's get to the any super chats? No super chats. Oh, it's okay though. I can any questions you guys have, whether super chat or not, I'm going to answer for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll get on out of here. It feels like everyone overrates Nebraska every year. Their attitude is they have to get better sooner or later. This is the year. There's something seriously wrong with their culture. That's what Mikey Mike says. Colby Vlach agrees with him. What has changed from Frost? Well, Nebraska went to a bowl game. They beat a competent out-of-conference opponent. Frost couldn't do any of those things. And they made a serious hire at OC and Dana Holgerson, which Eric Chenander nor any of the OCs, whether Matt Lubick or Troy, I think Troy Walters, maybe I'm misremembering his name though, neither of them were serious hires at Nebraska. But Rule does struggle in close games. This is also a historic thing, too. Outside of his third year at Baylor, he's very much struggled in close games, and he's never beaten a top 25 team. So, not everything has changed from Frost. There's a lot that Rule has to work on, but he is already a upgrade from Frost, for sure. Gonna be fun if wins are vacated, it's a stereotypical Buckeye. I mean, yeah. I mean, like, it is something to laugh about. Like, if you're an Ohio State fan, like, yeah, well, technically those seasons didn't happen, like, poke. But everyone remembers USC's vacated wins as, like, those teams were awesome. I'm going to tell you here, like, I'm objective, but I can also put on the Michigan fan glasses if I want to. And sometimes I do that with friends. Even in those conversations, I don't care about Tattoo-Gate. Like, I don't. I genuinely don't care about that. If there's anything about the Tressel era that I would care about, it would be the whole Claret situation. And I don't even know, like, how serious that was, because there's two sides to that whole story. But regardless of that, like, eventually people will remember 2021 through 2023 for, you know, the 12-2, 13-1, 15-0 season. There will be people who say, well, it was vacated, but it's going to sound a lot like the Michigan fans, I think, saying, well, 2010 was vacated. It's like, okay, yeah, but you still lost. Like, Michigan wasn't beating Ohio State even if they started Joey Bowserman. And Pryor couldn't play because of the whole thing. I'm confident in that. I'm also confident that if Stallions wasn't there, I'm pretty sure those Michigan teams beat Ohio State, especially because Kerry Coombs and Matt Barnes and that disaster of a defense existed. Like, certain things aligned during that time well outside of illicit actions that I think pointed toward the results, particularly in the game there. Michigan fans deserve this. I don't even care about the cheating, but so many idiot Michigan fans are saying Moore would be better than Harbaugh. Oh my gosh. I mean, there is always the chance that will happen because, for example, Ryan Day I think is better than Urban Meyer. I think Ryan Day, Ohio State's better than Urban Meyer, Ohio State. Urban Meyer, Florida, I think is better than Ryan Day at Ohio State currently, although that's a debate. But I think what Ryan Day has done with the program that Urban left him is better than what Urban maintained. I think that Urban had the advantage of beating up on weaker Michigan teams that especially were not as talented in the lines of scrimmage, and he didn't have Oregon or USC in the Big Ten. Penn State was still coming off of sanctions and its effects basically every year Urban was there. I mean, Penn State under Franklin against Day has been way better than what they were against Urban, and yet Day has a better record against Penn State than Urban did, and also some more dominant wins. So, yeah, it's possible, but saying that before he even coached is, wow. I mean, I was very optimistic about Michigan last year, and I don't think I said that. Moore's a better recruiter, but better coach? No, absolutely not. In that sense, anyone who still believes that, I think, would deserve some turmoil. Still believes that. If you did but no longer don't, look, we all make mistakes. Custom cut-ups. Let me pull out the pop-out chat for this. We've been live, wow, for almost 2 hours. I'm going to push it to 2 hours, and then we'll get off here. Why isn't this low? Oh, there it is. Okay, just loading all this up here. Should have done this before, but I wanted to be on time. And, you know, I was within 5 minutes of when I want to go live. So I've been earlier than I was earlier today than usual. Thoughts on Dan Mullen at UNLV? I think it's perfect. Mullen doesn't like to recruit. You don't have to recruit to succeed at UNLV. I think it's perfect for him. I think honestly, I would say he'll definitely have success there and either stay there or use that as a job to get back at the Power 4 level and rehabilitate his image. Is this new punting style going to work with rugby-style punts? I mean, I would say it allows you to do better fakes because your quarterback has a running head start. It allows your quarterback to roll out to the better side of protection. I think it will, more so because Mike Eckler's the special teams coordinator. So thank you, Wade Fair, for answering that question. I think Eckler's a great special teams guy. Penn State overrated AF this season, says Tom DeMay. Not really a question, but I just want to address that. Why do you think that is? Just curious. I've heard people say that before. Is it just James Franklin? I think that's the only valid reason to say that is James Franklin struggles in big games. If that's not the reason, then I'd probably strongly disagree. Matt Rule, a top 4 coach in the Big Ten, says Thurzero. Is he? Is he a top 4 coach in the Big Ten? I think that Day, Cignetti, Lanning, and Franklin are better than he is. So no. Rule is an argument, I think, to be better than any coach outside of those 4, though. Has a better argument. Has an argument to be better than any coach outside of those top 4. So top 4 coach, no, but top 5, I think could be. Rule just hasn't been in the Big Ten long enough. Cignetti has been in the Big Ten for a shorter period of time, but Cignetti just won 11 games at freaking Indiana. He crushed teams that Rule couldn't beat. He also crushed Rule head-to-head, coached circles around him. I know Cignetti doesn't have a Power 5 resume, but he has had better success at the G5 than even Rule did. With what Cignetti did in year 1, and it wasn't a bunch of close wins, it was a bunch of blowout wins, in my mind, that's an exception to the rule. And then Day, Franklin, and Lanning are more proven and have won big games. I mean, all of them have beaten, outside of Cignetti, beaten top 25 teams. Cignetti hasn't yet at Indiana, but he's also beaten everyone he should beat. I can't say the same with Rule. Like, take the UCLA game, for example. Cignetti goes down to UCLA and just drops a nuke on him, and then Rule can't even beat him at home with better talent. A year ahead of schedule. To be fair, didn't have a whole roster of players to bring with them, like Cignetti did, but still. Yeah. I think that he's top half in the Big Ten for sure. And top half at a program like Nebraska, I think means he's going to be around there for a while and ultimately succeed. But I can't say he's top 4 right now. Max Ellis. It's not a question, so I'm not going to highlight it. But if you're still here, what business do you run in Ann Arbor? I'm curious. Wade Farr. Last question I'll answer here. Are the 26, unless there's a super chat. If someone sends in a super chat, I'll stay on longer and answer. Are the 26 and 27 quarterbacks that are coming in going to really all stay at Nebraska and compete? Some of them will. But I think Raiola is going to be at Nebraska until 2027. I think he'll play again this year, play in 2026, and I don't think he'll declare for the draft until after his senior year because he'll be young enough to where they won't view his age as a problem. And I think with the year he had last year and the fact that he's really only going to be in year 1 of the Holgorsen system, it's going to take him until at least year 3 to be good. He's going to want to declare when he maximizes his draft potential. He has the potential to be a top 10 pick, and I just don't think that'll be maximized until his senior year. So he will be there for a while. I think at least one of them will. At least one of them. The recent quarterback incoming QBs, like the 2025 and 2024 ones, probably not, because they'll have to wait super long and they're not highly rated. But I know Nebraska has their eyes on like high touted 4-star, 5-star quarterbacks even for 2026 and beyond. Karnick Maple Village, best doggy daycare and dog boarding in the entire state of Michigan. Well, everyone, make sure to check out Max's dog daycare place. Thank you for mentioning that. All right, everyone. Wonderful show. Got 6 videos to release. So that's going to be pretty fun. Stay tuned for more content throughout the week, not just these clips that I'm going to re-release, and that way you can, watch it again, see if you missed anything, or maybe if I missed anything, and you can correct me in the comments, which I would love. There's also going to be videos that aren't from my live shows that I'm going to release over the next few days. I'll see you again on Sunday for our next live show at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to join our Discord server. Link is pinned in the live show. Please, I'm like that. I'll beg. I'm begging you to go in there, click that, join. We need as many fans in the Discord server as possible. You'll be assigned a role of your specific fan base, and then you can ask me a question in the YouTube mailbox. Oh, super chat here, so I'm obligated to answer it. No one. Why are so many people sour on Michigan overperforming, but those who are anticipating USC and Nebraska and Okie to do well? Is Okie like Oklahoma? I'm assuming is what you're thinking. No one. I don't know. I mean, I think the sourness is coaching. I think that's what it is. I think it's coaching. I think some people are being conservative due to what they anticipate as possible penalties. Those are some speculations that I have, I guess. But I think a lot of it is coaching more than anything. I think that USC was better coached and is better coached than Michigan, but Nebraska and Oklahoma not necessarily. Especially Oklahoma. But to have that roster with Oklahoma last year and to have that record was just bad. And Michigan was even better than Oklahoma in the power ratings, which is just pretty pathetic. But I also think it's proven production at quarterback. Oklahoma brought in Mateer, who you have college film on, was exciting. Nebraska returns a starting college QB, and so does USC. Michigan starting a true freshman. So I think it's mainly quarterback and then coaching, and also the fact that all of these teams host Michigan. So they're expected to beat Michigan because they're home teams from what most people think of as similar caliber teams. That's kind of my explanation. Thank you for the $5. Again, no one. He was one who actually asked a question that I made a video out of earlier in this segment. So thank you for also giving me questions of yours to answer in these Withdrawal Wednesdays, where I answer your questions that you ask in my Discord server. Thank you very much for the $5. And yeah, there are some people high on Michigan overperforming and lower on Nebraska, Oklahoma, USC. I've already said that I'm pretty high on USC when it comes to overperforming. I also think Michigan will overperform their win total. Nebraska and Oklahoma, you all just have to figure out when I release my Big Ten and SEC predictions. USC went wild in the portal. Yeah, they lost a lot, but they also gained a lot. Okay. Unless someone else sends in a super chat, we're done for the night. Again, I already said my piece. Just make sure to join the Discord server, navigate to the hashtag YouTube mailbox section, and ask a question. Thank you all very much. We'll see you again Sundays. Have a great day, everyone. See you soon.